Albuquerque City Councilor Tammy Feeblecorn and ecologist Sarah Hertel, talking about the Complete Streets Ordinance that includes green stormwater infrastructure practices recently adopted by the City Council. So I am going to ask Councilor Feeblecorn to introduce herself, and then followed by Sarah Hertel to introduce herself, and then Sarah's going to begin into the meat of the program after that, and we will move along. In general, we have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. Tonight, you can put a question you have in the chat. Tom Solomon is moderating the chat, and there is a possibility we might entertain some questions before we get all the way through. Welcome everyone. And Counselor, why don't you get us going?
Great, thanks, Jim. Hi, everybody. Really good to see so many names and faces that I know. I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk about some good news coming out of the Albuquerque City Council, because there hasn't been much. And so I think you all know me. I'm an environmental economist. I've been working on climate issues for my entire career. When I ran for city council, I had great plans for really strong climate action, and then the elections turned out the way they did. And so we've been finding unique ways to move forward, particularly climate resiliency. And that's what we're going to hear about tonight is ways that we're moving things forward. Not the big picture things that I wanted, but these are really, really important and are going to, really make sure that people are taken care of in our city. So I'm just glad to be here. I'm going to let Sarah introduce herself and then tell you a little bit about kind of the Complete Streets Ordinance and GSI. Then we'll come back and talk about how we got it passed. So Sarah?
Yeah, thanks, Tammy. Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Hertel. I'm an ecologist. I am an environmental consultant, but have been working in conservation for more than 20 years throughout the Southwest and a little bit in Pennsylvania, as my career has taken me there and back again to the Southwest. So I've worked with Tammy on a number of issues and also with Tom. I'm a former conservation program director, urban conservation program director at the Nature Conservancy and climate program director for the Nature Conservancy in New Mexico. So these are issues that are near and dear to my heart, and I was very grateful to have Tammy as a colleague and a co-conspirator on getting green stormwater infrastructure into the Complete Streets Ordinance. So Tammy, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, I'll just give a quick overview for folks that might not know the words we're using. So the city has had a Complete Streets Ordinance in place for quite some time. And what that means is that streets are no longer just for cars, right? So now in the city, has been for about a decade, when you're building a street or when you're doing major renovations to a street, the planners have to take into account more than just vehicles. They have to think through, how are pedestrians going to safely traverse this area? How are bicyclists going to get through this area? It's really important because, of course, we want zero fatalities, but we also want to encourage people to get out of their cars and get around the city in other ways. That is really one of the best things we can do for the environment. It also encourages infill, which is great. We don't want people sprawling out to the west side even further. We want to have as much infill, as much general density as we can within the city of Albuquerque. Obviously, that is huge for climate change as well. And so that ordinance has been in place for some time. But recently, thanks to Sarah and lots of other folks, we were able to update that Complete Streets Ordinance to require green stormwater infrastructure. So now, when we're looking at those streets and how we get people out of their cars and make sure pedestrians are safe and make sure it works for bicyclists and all the other things, we're also going to, whenever possible, include green stormwater infrastructure. Now, I did not know what this was until a couple of years ago when I got on council, but it's the best idea ever. I think everybody knows right now when you have storms or any kind of rainfall, they go into the giant collectors and they're just kind of, it goes into tunnels and it goes into back to the river, except that none of those are big enough anymore. Areas of the city that never flooded, ever, are starting to flood. And it's because of a couple of things that Sarah's going to talk to you about. But number one, because of climate change. We are seeing more and more extreme weather events. And with those extreme weather events comes a lot more rain than we've ever seen before. At the same time, we have made all of our surfaces in the entire city impermeable, right? So the water floods down and there's no place for it to go. And so green stormwater infrastructure, I'm gonna let Sarah do the details, but basically it gives a place for the water to go. It filters down, it removes toxins before it gets back to the water, to the river. It keeps the flooding and the hydroplaning and the roads down. And in my district, it will stop folks from having water literally in their living rooms when those extreme weather events happen. So it's a really great idea. It's when you think about it, you're like, oh, this is so simple. Why didn't I think about this before? But now it's in the ordinance and you have to think about it when you're doing any major renovation on streets or when you're adding new streets. So I think it's really an amazing progress that we've made in the city of Albuquerque. And I was really lucky. We had a lot of great experts working on this, but Sarah was my main go-to person. So I'm going to turn it back over to her to talk you through kind of how green stormwater infrastructure works, not only in this ordinance, but just how it can be applied citywide.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if I can do this. Here we go. Cue slideshow. Okay, can you all see my slides? Yes, thank you for the thumbs up. Okay, so this is a beautiful picture, and a lot of the artwork that I have is from other people, and so I will make sure to give credit to who the artwork is from. This is one of the images from an artist that was in the 5th National Climate Assessment. You may have seen it before, but I think it's really beautiful in the way that they have integrated sort of the newspaper clippings around climate with these water issues. So I hope that we will talk about how green stormwater infrastructure is an important strategy to mitigate, to adapt to climate, and we'll talk about the difference between adaptation and mitigation. But first, I want to introduce you to the Arid LID Coalition. About 7 years, me and a handful of other folks created this coalition as a way to impact and influence change around green stormwater infrastructure. This is just a little timeline here that shows how we've progressed through time. We started in 2014 with the watershed-based MS4 permit. There's lots of technical issues here. So MS4 means it's M and 4 S's, municipal, separate storm sewer system. Those are the 4 S's. And what that means is, as Tammy said, that all of our stormwater goes into gray pipes that storm system and goes untreated directly into the river. So carrying all of the trash, all of the pollution, all of the bad stuff that we don't want in our river directly into our river. So our concept was to create a coalition to bring people together around this idea to improve water quality, reduce pollution to our river, and create green spaces that were multifunctional, right? Creating habitat for people, for plants, for wildlife, and most importantly, be conscientious about our water use here in the desert. So through time, we have hit some milestones. We had a interdisciplinary workshop in 2019 that really turned some light bulbs on for a lot of people. And we're trying to replicate that with some additional trainings that we're doing now. In 2020, we worked with NMDOT to get GSI as part of their standard designs for all of their projects, construction projects throughout the state. So influencing a huge number of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres across the state of New Mexico. That was a big win for us. We heard from folks that maintenance was a real challenge. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to recognize it. How do we do these? So we created a training maintenance manual. We created a series of videos, and we have an ongoing free maintenance workshop through the Water Authority here in Albuquerque to train maintenance staff on how to maintain these really important infrastructure pieces. Because it's more than landscaping, it is actually engineered infrastructure. It just has natural components to it. So this is a paradigm shift that we're trying to get people to recognize, particularly in municipalities and along our streetscapes. And we had a bunch of other projects that came through in 2023. Bernalillo County included Green Stormwater Infrastructure standards that are now required in the county for all development. So that was an additional big win. We needed a similar win in the city of Albuquerque, and Tammy helped us do that with the complete streets. Wasn't exactly the avenue that we thought it would come in. You know, everything comes in different shapes and sizes than you expect, but I think it was a huge milestone, and we're really grateful for her help to get that implemented. So what does the Complete Streets Ordinance say? Okay, there's a lot of text on the screen. This is taken directly from the ordinance, but basically what this says is that GSI, or Green Stormwater Infrastructure practices, shall be designed. I love that word, shall be designed and incorporated into road improvements, landscape buffers. Those are those skinny areas between the curb and the sidewalk. That's what the landscape buffer is, also sometimes called a parkway strip. Bulb outs, which are into the street. They usually are around parking areas or on-street parking. So these are the kinds of features that we're talking about, and I'll get into more detail and show you pictures of these things so you know exactly what we mean. Green stormwater infrastructure shall be depressed. This does not mean they have anxiety. It means that they are like hollowed out so they can actually capture water, and that they will filter stormwater by biological processes and supply supplemental irrigation to landscape plants. This is really important as concepts in how to make GSI functional. It applies to all new roadways, cross sections, changing the way that the water flows on the street so that it is directed towards the inlets of these features instead of the gray infrastructure, and that existing gray stormwater infrastructure is used as overflow, right? So we've all heard about, I don't have a good slide on this, but we remember COVID, that everything was about flattening the curve, right? You got to bring down the top of the curve. The same thing kind of applies here with the hydrograph, or the flow of water during a storm event. And what we want to do is soak up that water in these distributed features like are outlined in this ordinance, so that the pipe system doesn't get overwhelmed and get backed up. And that is what's going to help reduce the nuisance flooding that's happening in our communities, in our neighborhoods that haven't seen it in the past. Okay. Oh, did I skip one? Yes. Okay. So these are the last three parts of the ordinance, and it says that we will use stormwater infiltration into the soil. We will create biological filtering processes. We will use organic mulch. We will not block these processes by using weed fabric. I can get into that later. We will, this is the best practices that we have to be able to improve our water quality and reduce trash and sediment and other debris and pollutants from flowing into our river. So again, lots of definitions that were added here that are really important so that everybody's working from the same language. And I also put on the bottom a link to the actual ordinance so that you guys can access that. And I'll just mention that the slides will be available. I'll send a PDF to Tom and he will send it out with the recording after this. So really quickly, I assumed that you guys all knew all about climate change and that I didn't tell you how hot it's going to be and all of those basic information. But I did want to touch on the concept of urban heat islands. So this is a graphic taken from the National Climate Assessment. And it really illustrates how the temperature changes depending on the density of the development that occurs in a city. And the reason that this is important, and when I was with the Nature Conservancy, and there's been subsequent studies since then, to quantify the heat island in Albuquerque, it's basically 5 degrees during the day and 8 degrees at night, warmer than the surrounding desert. And so that all of that concrete and asphalt and sidewalks and infrastructure retains that heat from the sun during the day and radiates that back out at night. It's the thing that is causing health issues for our ecological context, right? Our plants and our trees. It's causing problems for our wildlife and our insects. It's causing problems for our people and the health impacts of these things. And so really the overnight temperature is where people really get into trouble health-wise. And so this is the direct climate tie to green stormwater infrastructure. When I did that heat island analysis, what I learned was trees absolutely are important, but we don't have enough water to cover all the landscapes that we need in trees, right? So we have to be conscientious of where we're using that water. And so the best way to both mitigate the heat, clean the air, and clean the water in urban environments is through trees and other understory plants. So the sort of shrubs and grass, ornamental grasses and wildflowers and other plant material that we can use that helps mitigate that heat from the heat island impact. This is another graphic that's from the National Climate Assessment, and it really shows you how they break down the benefits of natural infrastructure in cities, how these different strategies can be used to both create mitigation benefits and adaptation benefits. Of course, I am focused more on the adaptation benefits as an ecologist, where we are using these trees and plants to create green spaces where there was none in the past, right? We're creating new green spaces that will help people reduce heat stress, reduce flooding, improve health, improve air quality, promote diversity. There's lots of studies, economic studies about how it improves property values, how it improves the rate of spending in shopping districts, and social cohesion, the way that community members interact with each other in places that are more green is more friendly and more connected than in places without these green spaces. So really quickly, I just want to show you the definitions that I use as mitigation, the difference between mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation, of course, reduces and stabilizes the levels of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere by reducing emission sources and enhancing sinks. And of course, trees can be part of those sinks, but in New Mexico, what we've learned through research is that our system is too dry and unproductive in the state of New Mexico to offset really anything. The natural landscape just doesn't have the capacity to absorb that much carbon that's in the atmosphere. And so we really need to think about mitigation as a way of reducing emissions. And of course, our sinks need to be protected. This gets into sort of more of the landscape scale, reducing fire risk in our wildlands, and protecting those sinks that we have. Climate adaptation, of course, is actions that you can take to reduce vulnerability to the harmful effects of greenhouse gases that have already been released. These are emissions that are already in the pipeline that we need to be adapting to because the climate impacts are coming. Regardless of how much mitigation effort there is, we're still going to see impacts. And so this is part of the Green Stormwater Infrastructure components. How do I get rid of this little thing? Could you guys see my little bar at the bottom or no? Oh, good. It finally went away. Okay. So what is exactly green stormwater infrastructure? Well, it is the addition of green space. It's passive rainwater harvesting, diverting rainwater from hardscapes into landscapes to absorb that water, whether it's on the street, near your home, that it acts in combination with the existing storm drainage system. It does not replace the existing storm drainage system, but we're using that stormwater as a way to irrigate our landscape. Okay, so what is the difference between low impact development and green stormwater infrastructure? Well, low impact development, think of it as the umbrella, and you have rain gardens and bioswales and curb cuts and soil sponges. These are green stormwater infrastructure practices that you use to achieve the objective of low impact development. And the way that it works is that the stormwater runoff comes into these temporary ponded areas. You have infiltration coming into the soil, healthy soil with all of the microbiome, fungi, and healthy living creatures in the soil. Create both the physical and chemical processes that break down pollution and help absorb water. And those soils with higher carbon density hold more water volume, which in return helps keep your plants healthy and reduces flooding. So here's some examples. Let's get down to it. The gray infrastructure looks like the pictures on the left. You have pipes and culverts and concrete. And on the right, it does basically the same thing, but with an engineered natural filtering system. I would much rather hang out on the green side than on the gray side. But as a wildlife biologist, that's probably no surprise to you. So let's talk about how this actually works. So the idea is you can have a storm drain that does the same thing as permeable pavers and a rain garden, but which one would you rather have, right? So the function is the same. They both collect stormwater to prevent localized flooding on sidewalks and roadways. But with the green option, the permeable pavers and rain gardens, you get a lot of extra co-benefits. It creates habitat, beautiful spaces, disperses absorption, filters water through the soil below the pavers. So this is the technique that you can use just to give you an idea of how these things are compatible and the function of each. So in a landscape adjacent to a parking lot, the picture on the left is the way that we are managing stormwater right now. You have the bathtub ring of really disgusting pollution that is accumulated here. You've got some trash in this basin. You've got some straggly plants that are not really doing that well. And the pros of this, in my opinion, are none. There is no reason to do this picture on the left when you can do the picture on the right. The cons, you know, the drawbacks of the way that we're currently developing and managing stormwater is that it increases heat because of all of that rock that we continue to spread everywhere. It doesn't treat stormwater at all. In fact, it treats it as a liability. It increases erosion and sediment. It doesn't address water quality at all. And in fact, it actually intensifies the drought conditions by separating the landscape from the water. So the idea of green stormwater infrastructure is really to capture and use the water where it falls, so that there is no runoff. It's basically the concept. So the pros of doing, you know, the picture on the right, which is this is an existing structure that's in Santa Fe. That was built by a company called Rain Catchers. They're a great organization that does a lot of really cool work. It does basically all of the opposites of what we're currently doing in most of our stormwater management. It reduces heat island effects by using more organic materials and shading of plants. You have all these beautiful, healthy plants that create landscapes and provide habitat for pollinators and wildlife and people. It reduces the potable water needs in our landscapes. About 40% of our potable water needs go to outdoor landscapes. So the more we're using rainwater to fill those needs, the less we need to use our potable water for that, and it can be saved for people to actually drink. So again, how does this work, right? You have sheet flow runoff that comes across a parking lot or a sidewalk. It flows into this sort of depressed parkway strip where you can have special inlets that to manage the debris and sediment that stormwater is carrying for easy maintenance. But then you have bigger sort of rock sizes in the bottom of the channel where the water is going to flow to prevent erosion. But in the upland areas where the water flow is at a slower rate, then you have organic mulch and plants that can, again, use that filtering process to remove the pollution. One quick thing that I just want to point out about native plants versus non-native plants is the native plants are on the right-hand side of this graphic. They all have very, very deep roots. These roots also provide a way for those plants to be healthy in our sort of desert and drought frequent system. But it also creates these tiny little pore spaces around the outside of all of the roots for the water to infiltrate deeply into the soil. And without that, the water just sits on the top. So this is why you can have pooling and puddling in lawn, because the root system of those turf-forming grasses is so dense that water can't actually penetrate it, which is why you need to aerate your lawn. So it's not meant for this kind of environment with our soils. And so the right plants in the right places are a very important choice to be made. There's lots of co-benefits, as I've said. I'm going to kind of skip along here because I think I've mentioned most of these. I think two things that I'll say that I haven't said yet. One is that having green stormwater infrastructure and the right sort of vegetation around, as Temi says, promotes people the walkability and bikeability of a city, but it also promotes recreation. It reduces heart disease in populations that have these things. It reduces rates of obesity. It reduces the rates of chronic illness because people are out in their environment interacting, and there's something really special that happens in the human body when people are able to interact with nature every day. We need this. There's 40 years of clinical research that shows that people need nature every single day. And the second thing I'll mention is that these features can also provide traffic calming features that help slow traffic down, which makes it compatible with these other forms of transportation, walking or biking. And it also can address a lot of environmental justice issues, EJ issues, by reducing nuisance flooding in neighborhoods that have been chronically under-resourced and underserved. So what does this look like? Here are some photos of things that are all from here. So on the top are sort of the larger scale features, and on the bottom are sort of more smaller scale features that can work from sort of a household scale to a streetscape to a small parking lot to a larger parking lot. And on the top, we have what I like to call industrial strength green stormwater infrastructure. These are giant rain barrel catchments, actually at the flood control district up in Sandoval County. A smaller sort of longer, bigger streetscape in Santa Fe. We have this large stormwater basin here in Albuquerque, and then the picture on the right is a project that I can talk more about that's in Corrales that manages 5 million gallons of stormwater. So again, industrial strength green stormwater infrastructure. You also have these smaller swales here and some sort of human-sized barrels that are also quite lovely in shape. So a project that I want to talk about really quickly. I think I'm talking too long, so I'm gonna move us along here. But one project that I think, as Tammy said, that sort of ran as the background and how we got to the ordinance is the Harvey Jones Channel, which is in Corrales. This is a really cool project that brought together a bunch of agencies and municipalities. We worked to treat more than 5 million gallons of stormwater annually that come through this channel. So strategically, it was an important place to have that finishing cleaning before the water hits the river. And 4 to 5 million gallons of treated wastewater that also flow through these channels. The picture on the bottom left is what it looked like when we started. It was mostly dead. Filled with invasive species. There was a few cottonwoods in there, which we saved and replanted. But primarily, we just removed it all. That you can see the next picture. We put in 4 new channels and planted them with willows and cottonwoods. And the picture on the right is what it looks like now. So a really valuable habitat project to illustrate sort of the large scale of what's possible with green stormwater infrastructure. And we're continuing to develop a queue of projects for all of the rest of the scales. I think one of the things that's really important about green stormwater infrastructure and the work that we do at the Arid LID Coalition is residential education and outreach. We host a boatload of trainings all of the time so people can learn how to capture rainwater at their homes in barrels or in passive rainwater harvesting, like these smaller channels and rain gardens kind of features, how to point that water towards your trees and your landscape. We've put information in water authority bills reaching more than 200,000 residents in Albuquerque. As I said, we've created maintenance workshops. We were a supporter of the Pueblo Alto Mile High drainage study, and now it's on its phase 2 and it's 60% engineering design, which is in Tammy's district. And we've created awards for the best green stormwater infrastructure across the state to help promote the idea that people are getting recognition for doing the right thing. And of course, policy is important. I think the NMDOT manual, including Green Stormwater Infrastructure, was a huge milestone for us. And of course, the Complete Streets Ordinance is just the most recent in those impacts. Okay, I made it. Tammy, back to you.
All right.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Maybe, yeah, we'll stop sharing and I can just do a real quick. You may be asking yourself, how did we get this bill passed unanimously through the Albuquerque City Council? I think you all are pretty aware that we have a very conservative council. And so all the cool things that Sarah just told you about, that is not what I used. Right? That is not at all how I sold this bill. So what I started was right like 2 years ago, 2 years in advance of this legislation, I started pointing out the flooding. And we have flooding in every district in the city. I don't think we're used to that. Like, we live in New Mexico, we don't expect there to be flooding, but there is flooding and it's getting worse. And so I started pointing that out to each of the other counselors. I didn't point out that it was because of climate change. I just pointed out that there's flooding. And so people start getting worried about that. You know, what am I going to do? How do I fix that? I was using, just for my
Tammy,
district.
there.
Yeah, it's not touching anything. But anyway, just for my district, I was using an estimate of $300 million to upgrade the stormwater management system, you know, just the pipes and things that would get it out of there. That's a huge number that I cannot afford. Then I talked to the state's infrastructure czar, and he laughed at me and said, I think it's really cute that you think you could do that for $300 million. So we've now upgraded that cost to say, if you wanted to if you don't want to do any green stormwater infrastructure, and you just want to update the existing pipes to make it, you know, not flood, just one council district would be somewhere between 500 million and $1 billion. That opens counselors' eyes, because we have to raise that money, right? And so started getting people thinking about, this is really expensive. I have to do something. I have people flooding. I talked about how if we do something about this flooding that is more affordable, we can also reduce liability to the city. When it floods, there's hydroplaning on streets. People get in wrecks and they sue the city. Happens all the time. We want to stop that. I talked about, and it was on one of Sarah's slides. It's not her favorite part, but it's something I used a lot when talking to fellow counselors. The more we can do this kind of thing, the less maintenance we're going to have on pavement in the streets, right? And so street maintenance is really, really, really expensive. The other thing that we said was, when you are watering public spaces, medians, streetscapes, those kinds of things, that costs a lot. We have to run pipes to that. We have to use potable water. But when we do green stormwater infrastructure, we can use the water that's coming from the sky. And so it's a lot cheaper that way. Those are the ways that we sold this to my fellow counselors. And then we used examples. In District 7, we have the Pueblo Alto Mile High project that Sarah mentioned a couple of times. We're using that as a pilot to show folks that it works. And we're also undertaking a very big project to redo the Han Arroyo in my district, to really change the flow of that arroyo, use some green stormwater infrastructure to create basically a park all around that. So that there'll be greenery and native plants and trees, and make it really someplace that people want to go. So the more we can do those kind of examples, the better. The last thing I did was start raising money for GSI, and this is very unusual in a city council, but not doing it just for my district, putting those funds into a region-wide, a city-wide fund that says, you guys can all use this money that I'm raising for green stormwater infrastructure. And so those are the messages we used. It broke my heart, because I want to talk about all the cool things that Sarah talked about, but you have to know your audience. And the most important thing was getting this passed. And so it worked. We did get this passed unanimously, and that's hardly ever done in the city of Albuquerque. So, so I'm very happy with that. And, you know, at some point you just think it doesn't really matter how I have to message something. The point is that we are moving something forward and it's a good thing for the planet. So that's my story. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Sarah is too, if anybody has anything that they'd like to ask.
Thank you, Sarah and Tammy. This has been enormously educational for me personally. I just kind of thought that it all happened, all that stuff happened by itself out there. I just want to lead off with one or two questions. And then everybody can, I'm sure there are a lot more people can jump in. One of the interesting things for me is the nature of the urban runoff. Sarah, you mentioned how nasty it is. Can you talk just a little bit more detail about that? I think in your world it's called the non-point source pollution, and what we've been missing about this.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the basic concept is that if you have water flowing, which we call stormwater runoff. Okay, so let's just follow a raindrop, right? Like water cycle style. So when the rain falls, if it hits a natural space, if it hits a whatever it is, natural, you know, a permeable surface, it's likely gonna soak into the ground, right? And stay where it falls. As soon as it hits a hard surface, it runs off, right? And that's where that term stormwater runoff comes from. The more surface that water travels across to get to its final destination, which is the Rio Grande, then that water is going to pick up and carry with it any other really disgusting item that it comes across. It's going to pick up all of the heavy metals from the brakes and materials coming off of people's cars. It's going to pick up herbicides and pesticides that people are spraying, you know, all over the place. It's going to pick up oil and gas and, you know, I don't know, all kinds of chemicals that are on our roadways. And all of that, including all of the trash, all of the cigarette butts, all the weird things that people throw out their car windows, and including the couch in the kitchen sink, which I have seen in arroyos. They're all getting carried into our river. And so the best way, as you said, for the point source pollution, the way that a city meets, at least in New Mexico, the way that a city meets that federal requirement of non-point source pollution is through the MS4 permit, which is, again, the municipal separate storm sewer system. Okay, and this is the pipe network that carries the stormwater from our cities into our river. What I'm saying is that these distributed features, if we could capture enough water at our homes to reduce the amount of runoff, and then in addition to that, we use these distributed features as what we call a treatment train. So if you think of a car, a train car, it does different, each car does a different thing. You pick up the big stuff first, and then you keep working your way down to the really small stuff that you can't see. And so these distributed features are where you can reduce the pollution that's making it into the water system. And that, like I said, that happens through the biological, chemical, and physical processes that occur in the soil. And I think one of the misunderstandings about that is that you end up with sort of the bathtub ring that I showed in that one picture. But when you have, that is a swale, but it's not a bioswale. There's no bio in that swale, right? There's nothing living, it's just rocks. And so if you have the biology, if you have the living plants, the living soil, the healthy soils, that's when you get those chemical processes that physically break down those pollutants into something that's less toxic and more inert. And then it's fine for them to be in the soil, right? It doesn't accumulate in the same way that pollution accumulates when it's just those heavy metals that just sort of sit on top. I hope that answers your question. That was kind of a long answer. Sorry,
No,
Jim.
that's great. And I have one more quick question, and maybe this would be for Tammy. Seems like we have a ways to go before we can get from where we are to where we need to be with GSI. Do we have, I'm unclear whether we just have jurisdiction on new infrastructure, or we can go back and fix old stuff. What's the timeline? How quickly are we going to get to the future?
So, good question. The ordinance that we passed and all the policy work that we're doing is for new construction and then major renovations. But obviously that's not going to get us where we have to go. And so I think the project that I mentioned in the Pueblo Alto Mile High area of District 7, that is going into an existing long time, these houses were built in the 50s, neighborhood, adding swales and bump outs into those streets, adding things into alleys there, adding things into the other, like where it could be like a pop-up park. We have to do that en masse. And so, you know, we're just getting started in Albuquerque. Tucson is ahead of us. They have quite a few projects that show really good results, but you know, it's a lot of funding to get moving, but we are in the 60% design phase of our first project. I think that will be a great success because we've had Arid LID Coalition and lots of other groups working on it. And we have enough support to move those forward. Now, that one project's not going to do it. We need these distributed all over district. So we have to really, you know, think through ways to move these quickly. Now, it is a lot cheaper to do this than it is to come up with the $1 billion that we're going to need to make the stormwater system bigger. And so that's the major selling point. And we have a lot of great support. We just learned about 10 minutes before we got on this call that Senator Heinrich has included this project into his congressional directed spending list for next year. And so that's a really big deal. We could get some additional funding if that bill makes it through. But, you know, I've already got about 10 million. We've got the first phase of this completely paid for. And with the support from folks like Senator Heinrich, we expect to be able to do much more. And so it's, you know, it's not going to be tomorrow, but we're starting and we just need to keep plowing through these. And I want District 7 to be the first one because I think it's the easiest ones to get done because you don't have to convince me. But continually looking for money, moving little piece by little piece is the method that we're going to get there with.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to open this discussion up, questions and discussion further. So we can do two things. We can raise our hand by hitting the button at the bottom of the screen that says whatever it says.
Reactions.
Reactions, thank you. Or if you've already put something in the chat, Tom Solomon can pull something of those things out. Tom, you want to go ahead and moderate?
Sure. Let me start with a couple of the ones that are in the chat. There've been some back and forth, but Tammy just touched on some of the stuff about costs, but my question there was, how do the maintenance costs compare between gray infrastructure and green infrastructure? And maybe just expanding on that, do you have an estimate to compare to the $500 million per district per solution if it were the green stormwater?
Yeah, I do. So I just put a link in the chat. It goes to the Nature Conservancy story about a a researcher from Texas A&M who did a cost benefit analysis of implementing green stormwater infrastructure versus traditional gray infrastructure and found that it's between 70 and 80% cheaper to put in green stormwater infrastructure than gray infrastructure. So that's to install it. What I know about the maintenance is that it's not, the maintenance is not more costly, it's just different. And this is the paradigm shift that we're dealing with, that is like, we're having a hard time getting the systems, the workflows to sort of engage here for municipalities to sort of recognize green stormwater infrastructure as a different kind of landscape. Remember, I said it's an engineered infrastructure, the same as a pipe. It just has natural elements to it. And treating it as such, because right now it's a, well, wouldn't that be nice if we could have some cute little plants, right? But they don't quite get that it's what it's going to do. So I think we're working on the details of estimating the cost of maintenance better. So hopefully that's something that we'll have in the near future, but we don't have that quite yet. The hard numbers on that quite yet, but we do on the installation. So
And I'll just add
75% savings is like, I mean, who can argue with that?
So I'll just add in on that, you know, I think Sarah's right. It's different, and different is hard, particularly for folks that have been working in the Department of Municipal Development for 20 years, and that's not how they do things. And so we've done a couple of things to really jumpstart the maintenance of these kinds of projects. One is I was able to put Sarah and her nonprofit on contract with the city to provide, you know, expert analysis and support on these GSI projects. And then the second thing was we put GSI into our citywide priority list for the next year. And so it is something that now the administration must focus on and must report back to council, so it can't get through the cracks, because it's going to be a challenging couple of years getting staff really focused in on how to maintain this GSI as we put it in. So those two steps I think were really important.
So, and I'll just add to that, as part of that contract that Tammy mentioned, I'm meeting tomorrow with the head of DMD, the head of planning, and the head of redevelopment, to get them to start talking to each other and figuring out how to remove the barriers between the departments as projects progress through various approvals through the city. So, and there's more of that to come. So those are the kinds of things that I'm doing and my team is doing to help sort of remove those barriers to implementation and to help streamline the process of construction.
Thanks. There are a couple others, but this last one is kind of pertinent to the conversation. So is there city money allocated for this? Tammy, I think you covered some of that already, but how, you know, how's the money being collected? Is there enough? Is it going to be allocated by districts? Where are we at on that?
Yeah, good question. So I've been able to put a large chunk of our GEO bond last year went to flooding issues, including GS. It was the first time that we put a large amount of money into this. And like I said, I did not do it for District 7. I did it for several districts so that those counselors are then bought into this concept as well. There's always a need for more money. And I'm always out there, you know, trying to get additional funding. That's why I'm so excited about Senator Heinrich. But, you know, counselors do have a lot of leeway in raising funds for these kinds of projects. The state legislators have also been very generous. So we'll just keep every time there's an opportunity, I'll put more money in. And I do, as just a matter of course, I never put it for District 7 only. I always put it for citywide so that other counselors can do these as they want to.
Thanks.
So also just add on that is that when I finished the Harvey Jones project, and there was a bunch of write-ups in the paper and on the news, and it was very well publicized. The head of the state revolving fund, which is a fund that's used for projects like this, called me on the phone and was like, "Hey, can you do some more projects like this? We got more money than we know what to do with. Where should I put it?" And I was like, "Oh, let me give you a list." And so I think there, with the infrastructure bill, the IRA, I'm forgetting, help me out with the acronym there.
Inflation Reduction Act,
Yes,
bipartisan
thank you, Tom.
infrastructure law. Those are the two.
Yes. With that money coming in, that money is filtering through existing state programs. And so the municipalities have to be ready to sort of catch that money now, right? It's finally making it to the ground where we can actually apply for it. And so having these projects in a place where you have a 60% engineering design, now you can start applying for those kinds of funds and get them to these projects. So we're in the right time phase for some of these things. I'll also just add that to address some of the other questions that are in the chat, that the Arid LID Coalition is moving forward with at least one depressed median project where we're leading it, and the city, we're working directly with the city and getting our own funding to basically like pay for the contractors to do it on behalf of the city. So this is another model, and what we're trying to create is a repeatable sort of stepwise progression process that is available, so that if other communities, other neighborhoods want to put one of these features, I can give you the playbook, right? Like we can help you. The Arid LID Coalition can start helping neighborhoods put these things throughout the city and help find funding for them. So that's another avenue that's coming to play.
Thanks, Sarah. There was a series of questions, and I'll just kind of bundle them together. So there was the stormwater infrastructure, Green Stormwater Infrastructure bill that passed, and then there was a sustainability plan for the city. I think some people are conflating or comparing the two and want to know what the difference is, and then that led to a discussion of the Complete Streets Ordinance. So if you could disentangle those three for us, Tammy, that'd be great.
Sure. So the Complete Streets Ordinance is what we updated to include Green Stormwater Infrastructure. We also just updated our sustainability ordinance for the city, and that is implementing all the things in the city's climate action plan. And that also passed. And in there, it does say we're going to maximize green stormwater infrastructure. So it is mentioned in both places. But those are two separate bills. And the real, the heart of it, every time we're going to be doing something on roads or streetways, we are going to include GSI was in the Complete Streets Ordinance.
Very good. Thank you. I think that was clear. Let's see. There was a question from well, let me get this one first, from Steffi. How does GSI change for rural areas? And does the USDA have any funding for such program?
Good question. I don't think that the USDA has any direct funding for GSI, but there are a couple of different ways. I guess it is USDA money, through the state forestry community, let me get the program right. Urban and Community Forestry Program. They have funding that any community and lots of rural communities can apply for this, to get funding for trees. and other projects, including GSI. So GSI is now part of the language that you can apply for those state funds. If you're a municipality, they have a ongoing revolving application process that they review, I think, quarterly. And right now it's up to $60,000 per project. So that's a good deal. I am also on a large project that was funded also through the IRA funding through USDA for a large scale community forestry project in southwestern New Mexico. So I'm working with 6 cities, towns, Silver City, Lordsburg, Deming, Hurley, Baird, and Santa Clara, to create community forestry plans for those 6 communities, and it will all include green stormwater infrastructure. So I am weaving it into everything else that I'm doing, and I hope that everyone else will too. And thanks, Steve Glass, for recognizing that the coalition is all volunteer effort. We have no staff and no money. Everything that we do is based on volunteer effort. So really powerful organization.
Excellent. Question about permeable concrete and the pavers. What are those and how well they work and where do they come from? And tell us more about that.
Yeah. So the best option that we have here in our climate is the permeable pavers. And there are some, there are permeable concretes and permeable asphalts, but you need a vac truck, which is basically a giant vacuum that sucks the dirt and other particulates out of the pore space that's in the concrete and asphalt. So with as windy as it is here, with all of the dust flying around, the permeable concrete and asphalt are not great options. You need basically spaces that are bigger than the pores in those materials to really be sustainable. I mean, they are here, but we haven't had a lot of really good luck with them. They need more maintenance than most municipalities are willing to do, right? You got to use that vac truck like Johnny on the spot with that, and we're just not. So let's just be real about how we're going to do maintenance and maybe use other strategies. But the permeable pavers are the best option for us because the actual spaces between the bricks is where the water soaks through.
Do weeds and other plants grow in the grout lines between the pavers?
Depends on what kind of material you'll put in between there. So there are some companies that that use a sort of porous binder agent that's a little bit like epoxy that holds those spaces together so that they're hard, kind of like permeable concrete, but still allows the water to go through. So that's the best option to get rid of the weeds in between the pavers and still keep it permeable.
Got it. Okay. A question about APS. Are they involved at all? Albuquerque.
Not really.
No.
They're really hard to work with. I have tried for years to get them to plant trees and do water harvesting. And I've had the best luck when I have a teacher and a principal who's willing to sort of buck the system and go their own way. But I have not had any success working with APS as an organization. I've tried and I can't crack that nut.
Wow. Interesting.
I had better luck with NMDOT, which I thought was unchangeable.
Okay. Those were some of the big questions. We have lost Jim because of his rural internet connection gave up on him. So I will carry on through the end. Why don't we just see if anybody wants to verbalize a question that might remain. So if folks want to, go down to the reactions bar at the bottom of the Zoom panel and look for the hand raise tool. If you raise your hand, we can call on you and you can ask your question. Aha, Jim McKenzie has magically reappeared. All I
Thanks
had
to
to
the-
do was invoke your name and here you are.
All right, yeah. Through the vagaries of Starlink, I'm back. Thank you.
Do you have a question, Jim?
Uh,
We were
yeah,
soliciting questions.
when is dinner? No, I think this has been, continues to be insightful, and we can continue on. We don't have a hard stop here, so we can continue on as long as we have a productive conversation.
Yeah, I was asking for people to raise their hands if they have a question. So is there anybody else with a query? Susan Homer. I think, can you, yeah, I think you can unmute. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I saw a place where a project in my district no, how do projects get initiated? How do you know if there's some place in your district where it would be appropriate for one, or if I thought there was a place, how would I go to my counselor or what?
So I can give a quick answer, and then I'm sure Sarah has more information. So what I've learned from Sarah over the last couple of years is really important. Everybody can do a GSI project in their own yard. And she
Right.
has said this many, many times. Like, you should not be.
Tammy, we're
Uh-oh.
losing your audio.
Tammy,
Really?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Now, yes.
yeah.
So you can always do it on your land, and I think that's really important. And if everyone did that, think of the impact. But if larger scale projects that are going to be, for example, phase 1 of the one in my project is going to be about $12 million. Larger scale projects like that are generally started by either the staff or the counselor for a district that's working on, a specific flooding issue. But if there's like, for example, a median that you think would be just a great opportunity when it rains, there's a lot of runoff from that, I would take it to your counselor and say, hey, you have this new GSI part of the Complete Streets Ordinance. Next time this is up for a redo, you should put in some GSI here. I think that kind of I would be thrilled to get a question or a comment from a constituent like that. And so I think the more we can push on our side, the more backing it gives counselors that want to do something like this.
So it sounds like a counselor, I'm thinking, my counselor is Sanchez. He's probably not going to do anything unless somebody complains to him about flooding, right?
That is more likely true, but it shouldn't stop us from asking our elected officials for what we want. And so,
right.
I would encourage you to still say that, or at least send an email that says we'd like to see these in our district. We are here to serve, and everyone should be listening to what their constituents want.
I agree totally. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah, fabulous work, Tammy.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Tom, I do have a question.
I'll just
do
put
have quick.
I'll put a quick plug in for Steve Glass, who's answering all the questions in the chat. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Steve. He's also
So I have
volunteer.
a quick question. I'm not sure, Tammy, if this is in your district, but a number of years ago, there was very severe flooding in the area around the main post office. So that would be Broadway and Lomas.
Yep.
And as a result of that, the way the city dealt with it is there was maybe an acre or 2 acres or 3 of a big area that was excavated and basically made a big bathtub so the stormwater could go there.
I think we've lost Jim, but you probably get a sense of his question.
I got the gist. So I will say that, that was quite some time ago, and it's
Is this
downtown.
possible to integrate the configuration that it is now?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that we see is everywhere that it floods, the knee-jerk reaction is like, let's put in a retention pond. And even in my district, when we had all the flooding, lots of folks, including people who work for the city, like, let's just buy up homes, demolish them, and put in a giant retention pond like they did over downtown. And my answer to that is like, that is not always. Is it echoing for others?
Yeah,
Yes.
maybe everybody could go on mute.
Okay, let me try again. So, I think for the time when that was put in, they did something and it stopped the worst of the flooding, and that's great. But it's a little old school, and it doesn't have any of the co-benefits that you heard about from Sarah for these kinds of GSI projects. And so I am moving way far away from just let's put in a retention pond to let's really make these things pretty, have all the benefits that we're going to see from reduced traffic problems, and make it pretty and make wildlife have a place to live and improve water quality going back into the river. That just seems like a better approach than just let's go build a giant pond and see what happens.
Thank you, Tammy. I see that Lori has raised her hand. Lori?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to ask this, but it seems like there's different designs for the medians that are made to deal with different things. Like I've noticed that they've put a lot of really large rocks in the medians along Lomas and like near Lomas and Louisiana to keep the homeless people off of the medians, but then you've got the other problem. Well, when it rains, there can be flooding there. So, it's like these two different designs might be working against each other.
Right.
So I'd just like Tammy to maybe comment on that.
That is the number one reason that I push so hard for this GSI inclusion in the complete streets. I am really frustrated. It happens in my district when the administration wants to redo a median. They build it up with big rocks. They make it inhabitable for people to stand in the middle of the median, which seems to take precedence over all other goals for the city. And I think that's just not okay, for a lot of reasons, but motherly just the humane part of that, right? Do we really need to keep people off of tiny little strips in our district at the cost of not doing green stormwater infrastructure, and quite frankly adding to the urban heat island impact rather than reducing it? And so those really annoyed me. Those ones on Lomas that you talked about, there was some massive infighting between me and the administration on those. And that is one of the reasons that I push so hard for the GSI inclusion in the bill.
Thank you, Tammy. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll have a quick wrap up.
Ellen? Ellen, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just looking for the unmute. I haven't used Zoom in a long time. Yeah, we've been wanting to do our front yard forever and we keep putting it off because we just don't know what we want to do. And I need a lot of help, like design and all kinds of stuff. I mean, what do you suggest? Where do I go? This GSI, I could apply for that? I mean, what do you suggest?
So I have another contract right now working with the Water Authority on their Xeriscape rebate program. So do you currently have turf grass or lawn, or is it already something else?
Well, we're looking at the front yard and it's rocks and,
Rocks.
desert plants and junipers that we
Yeah.
gotta get rid of and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put my email in the chat so that you guys can all get to me. But there are some great examples on 505 Outside, which is the Water Authority's website, that give you sort of the kind of plant palette and design aesthetic that will give you some ideas. I can also give you some names of contractors that I know, designers and things like that, that are great people, great local businesses that use Green Stormwater Infrastructure as the center point of their designs if you want to hire. I have done my own yard in little bits and pieces over the years and redo them. It's a way for me to sort of test these things out in, on my own land. And so I like to do that as well. So it definitely can be done. You can do it yourself if you're so inclined. I think that the other thing that you can do is through Bernalillo County, through there's a bunch of classes through Bernalillo County that you can take. There is several rainwater harvesting courses. You can link to the videos that are available online. Steve, put in the link to the rainwater ambassadors. Yeah, see, he knows this. Thanks, Steve. So at the link that Steve just put in at burnco.gov/rainwater, there's instructional videos on how to do this yourself. And it walks you through the whole thing. I helped write a guide for Bernalillo County that gives you the instructions in a booklet form to go with the videos. And so there's lots of resources out there for you to sort of explore so that if you're going to hire a designer, you sort of know what it is that you want to ask for. And if you're so ambitious that you want to do it yourself, these resources will help you do it yourself. So
yeah, I think if we were going to do it ourselves, we would have done it by now. This has been years, and I want to make the city walkable. I want a tree. I want to make it great, but we're just not real creative, unfortunately. So I think I just need help with that. And Tammy, I think you said that individuals, residences can use GSI to do this. Is that what you said?
So I didn't mean that there's any funding for individuals, although I think there are probably some rebates and things through the Water Utility Authority. I just meant that everyone on this call and everyone that has a yard can make green stormwater infrastructure projects within their yard.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's good. Okay, well, thank you.
That was a great question. In case people don't know, it might be a good time to save the chat and so you have access to the various links that are put in there. So in order to do that, you go down to the bottom of your screen and click on chat, and that'll open the chat window if it isn't already open. And in the upper right-hand corner of the chat window is a series of 3 dots. And if you click on that, you have an option to save the chat, and it'll save it onto your computer, and you can get to it later and find all the valuable information that's in there. Good. All right. Well, unless someone is completely overwhelmed by their question they need to ask, I think we should wrap it up. Sarah and Tammy have been wonderful and very patient with us for our uninformed questions. Thank you. I'm speaking. And thank Tom for helping me herd cats. So it's been really fun. I want to put a plug in for next month's speaker series. If you're interested, the subject is methane regulation. It's pretty far distant from what we talked about tonight. But as we all know, methane is an enormously potent and destructive greenhouse gas. And there have been big changes at the state and federal level in regulating methane. So we're going to look in detail, with some detail, at the probability of success that these new regulations will help mitigate methane damage. And the presentation is going to be by Antoinette Reyes, who is of the Sierra Club and is been following these issues very closely. So join us on June 24th, same station. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.